Hello there, welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be doing an analysis of the Jem'Hadar attack ship, or Dominion bug ship, or Jem'Hadar fighter, whatever you want to call it. It went by many names, but they were effectively the same ship. A vessel that has a little bit of inconsistency in its lore, and I can only assume in universe that can be explained away with slight variants of the class. But before we get started, like, share, subscribe, comment down below if you like this video. There's a full playlist by now, as well as an extensive playlist of Star Trek related episodes. With all that said, let's get into it. These vessels were first encountered in the Gamma Quadrant during early forays by the Federation into that area of space via the Bajoran wormhole, although Starfleet for some reason didn't make these intrepid adventures into another quadrant with vessels like Galaxy-class starships, not until the USS Odyssey went there. They did this with smaller vessels that were relatively easy prey to these extremely robust and well-built little ships. And little is relative. Here we come to the first inconsistency with these vessels. Generally speaking, they are small ships. They're not very big. They are well armed and powerful, yes, but they rely on numbers and maneuverability for strength, although they do have some formidable technology behind them. Some of these vessels have been seen to be perhaps up to a couple of hundred meters in length, but they seem to be more on average about 90 to 100 meters in length. And as I said, this is probably a behind the scenes inconsistency due to forced perspective in space and model shooting and etc, but within universe, different variations of the class. In its stock form, one of these vessels has at least a Warp 7 capability, although it is likely capable of greater speeds, although it's not known if it can sustain them for a protracted period of time. They are armed, again in their stock form, we'll get to some variants in a moment, with a forward and an aft Polaron weapon, which is capable of firing in both beam and pulse form. They are also equipped with variable torpedo launchers, meaning they can carry photon, quantum, or any other variant of a torpedo in their arsenal. Interestingly, the vessel's shield matrix was a completely unknown technology to the Federation. It's the vessel's primary form of defense, but the shields had an inherent ability to prevent tractor beam lock-on to the ship, even when seemingly not active. The vessel's hull was also designed to make it difficult to hold onto with a tractor beam. The interior of the ship was, as expected, extremely Spartan and utilitarian, in keeping with the sort of Dominion's disregard for the comfort of the crew. That said, Jem'Hadar and Vorta, although Vorta may be a little more than the Jem'Hadar, don't really require comfort. Jem'Hadar don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't really take downtime that often unless they really have nothing to do. And with the crew complement of a ship of this size being on average over 40 personnel, there really wasn't much for the Jem'Hadar to do other than train and maintain ship's systems and operations. The vessels were notable for not having a sick bay of any kind, not even like a triage center. Most of the Jem'Hadar likely have to go back to their bunk to recover, or they're just shot. It's easier to just grow a new Jem'Hadar than really have one laid up for weeks at a time, although it's likely the Dominion did have other medical facilities. It is not believed that these craft had any form of auxiliary vessel, such as shuttles of any kind. They were never demonstrated to have them, although it's likely they had some kind of small hangar so they could pull ships into them. They didn't have anything in them. They were mostly going to dock to other vessels themselves. It also lacked escape pods, as again, the Jem'Hadar and Vorta were very replaceable from the Dominion's point of view, and escape pods weaken the hull. They are an extra thing you've got to build, an extra thing you've got to design. They're labor intensive. And quite frankly, the Dominion just doesn't care. The Jem'Hadar are suicidally violent anyway, so it really made no difference to them, and the Vorta are expected to die. They did, however, have extremely sophisticated transporters that could beam through nearly anything at a greater depth than Federation transporters could get their way through, say, rock or other mineralized materials. They could also beam through most species' deflector shields, although this was something the Federation would eventually overcome, as was the Jem'Hadar ship's ability to penetrate the shields of Federation ships with their weapons, or at least with the Polaron weapons. It's not known if the torpedoes in the early days could also penetrate shields, but at bare minimum, the Polaron weapon systems could. The transporters were longer range than Federation transporters, could beam larger, more complicated materials, and as I said, they could beam through pretty much anything. If needed, the transporters could be used as an escape off the ship, but again, that would only be under select circumstances. We even saw that these vessels, despite their relative disposable nature sometimes, were actually used to transport important dignitaries of the Dominion, such as a changeling. On more than one occasion, a founder was seen to be commanding a battle from one of these ships or simply using one as a transport, not basically utilizing larger, easier target battle cruisers, which might be a more obvious target, which is actually a fairly smart plan in a way. There are so many of these ships engaged in a battle, one of them won't really stand out for a changeling being on it for someone trying to take it out. Other random interesting quirks of the vessel, notable to the bridge, there's no seating, as again Jem'Hadar and Vorta, you don't need to sit, you can stand, seats are extra. There's no view screen, as they simply don't care if the rest of the crew can see out of the ship. Only the Jem'Hadar first and the Vorta use a heads-up display that connects them directly to the ship's sensors, which we're going to talk about in a second as we explore the vessel's tactical systems, allowing them to basically put a view screen inside their head that allowed them to see outside the ship in any direction where they were looking, as well as get other up-to-date information from the sensor arrays. Now, a lot of noise will always be made about how advanced their torpedoes are, or advanced their weapons are, or good fighters the Jem'Hadar are, and all those are valid points, they really are. For a start, these ships actually, in a tactical sense, don't need to carry a crew as large as they do, an average of 1 Vorta and say 42 Jem'Hadar. They don't need that many on board, they have that many on board because Jem'Hadar are cheap, they're disposable, and it gives them a surplus of troops to beam into a situation, say aboard an enemy ship or down to a planet's surface or onto a starbase to help secure it. It gives the vessel increased flexibility. These vessels are very versatile. But the sensors are a particular note. Dominion sensors were extremely sensitive, very long range, could penetrate cloaking devices. These ships' ability to lock onto multiple targets, engage and withdraw was massively dependent on the basically overlooked system of their sensors. Without such advanced systems, they wouldn't really be as effective as they could be. The fact that they could see through a cloaking device, the only way known to avoid it was to basically power down all systems and hope for the best while still utilizing the cloak. And even then, the Jem'Hadar sensors would still kind of pick up a kind of shadow that if a smart Jem'Hadar first or Vorta was aboard, they might realize was still a cloaked ship. But they were known to be able to see through them, and there was some intelligence that a vessel travelling above Warp 6 would be more visible, although this may not actually be true. This could have simply been a Dominion trick. But to explore the more fun weapon systems of these vessels, as I said, in their stock form they were armed with a forward and an aft polaron emitter, as well as torpedo launchers, but they were also later equipped by the 2370s, on occasion at least, with disruptor-based armaments as well. And they would also, in 2375, begin to be retrofitted with the Breen energy dispersal technology, basically the ability to knock out all of the energy aboard an enemy ship, although this technology came too late in the war for it to have a meaningful impact. Another favourite tactic of the Jem'Hadar was when their back was against the wall, they would simply use the ship itself as a weapon, go as fast as they could, as hard as they could at a single target and rip through it. Most vessel shields and hulls couldn't withstand such a massive impact of a high velocity, high energy target ramming straight into it, and as a result it would tear it apart. We saw this with the Jem'Hadar engaging the Klingons at the Battle of Chintaka, using suicide tactics to weaken the Klingons, as well as their engagements with vessels such as the USS Odyssey, which, even though it was retreating, the Jem'Hadar made a point of colliding with the ship in order to cripple it and prevent its escape. However, the Dominion had far superior tech to the Federation, but it was not impervious to attack. Starfleet was able to, although it would take a few hits, to actually inflict damage on these ships, and if they were really determined, they could. In the early stages of the conflict between the Dominion and the Jem'Hadar, the ability of the Dominion to penetrate Federation shielding gave them a huge advantage, and these ships' maneuverability and speed also was an asset. But as we've discussed in previous videos, in an age where response systems are so efficient, targeting systems are so advanced, being small and maneuverable when up against a ship like a Galaxy-class starship isn't necessarily much of an advantage. The weapons are so accurate and so responsive that even small, fast-moving targets like a shuttle or a fighter are easy prey for a starship of that size. Simply, they're not going to miss. The Jem'Hadar's advantage was their ability to incapacitate the Galaxy-class starship, for example, quicker than it could destroy them, which in the early stages of the war was a substantial advantage. However, once the Federation was able to adapt to the Jem'Hadar's ability to penetrate their shields, the main tactical advantage of these ships was nullified, and it required the Dominion to make these vessels move in larger numbers throughout the remainder of the war, as 1 or 2 ships would be too vulnerable in an engagement with the Federation or the Klingons or the Romulans unless they were willing to resort to suicide tactics every time. A Galaxy-class ship could incapacitate them. During large battles, of course, they'd mobilize in large formations, and typically a patrol of these ships was 2 or 3 vessels, occasionally larger, but a standard Jem'Hadar patrol was 3. These ships doubled as scout vessels, reconnaissance ships, escort craft. They were the general purpose vessel of the Dominion, and sometimes a controversial, yeah, they kind of do look like a bug, but some of the best designs in technology are inspired by nature. Nature spent billions of years making itself, the most evolved thing in the universe. Basing your ship on the hardened shell of a beetle? Not a bad shout, really. So, that is the Jem'Hadar attack ship, prolific during the late 23rd century, particularly during the Dominion conflict with the Allied powers of the Alpha Quadrant. Formidable, fast, maneuverable, and technologically superior to anything the Allies had, its only real disadvantage was its small size, which made it vulnerable to the extremely accurate and formidable weapon systems of the far larger Starfleet vessels that it was engaging. But let me know in the comments below where you sit on this. I'm aware that a lot of Star Trek fans kind of don't like these ships. They're a bit of a... They seem to do whatever they're needed to do in an episode. Sometimes they're really hard to destroy, but then the Defiant takes them out with a few shots. But before, other vessels were struggling. Plot armor. That is the end of this video. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.